Hey guys, this is David, aka Don. Going to be going through this tutorial for creating foliage in UDK. Going to go through some of the modeling techniques I used, how to get it into the engine, creating the Vertex painting on it, and the material setup for it, so you can get this cool motion in game. Won't be going over the grass tutorial. You can create it on your own, just using the same principles I used to make these daisies that you're seeing there. Alright, so we're opening up our scene here. First thing we're going to do is create a small plane just to get a rough scale of what we're going to do. Got my background picture there, the daisy. So we bust out the line tool and create a profile of what we're looking at. Flipping back and forth between the reference picture there while we're creating that. This all gets changed a lot throughout, so it's really just creating your rough shape. After we get that done, we're going to get the lathe tool to create that into a 3D image. Just moving the center of it to get it paired up. It's really just going back and forth a lot with your reference image. Important thing to remember on organic materials is nature doesn't like right edges, right angles, so keeping everything smooth is really good. Going ahead and throwing a turbo smooth modifier on there now just to get the poly count up and get that really smooth look. Also making a variation here for the opened version of that pod. Alright, so now that I got the two versions of the pod I want, I'm going to go ahead and start making the pedal. Just using a simple box there, leveling out the dimensions of it. Gonna go ahead and add some height segments just to make the subdivision a little bit smoother when we add that turbo smooth on there. First modifier I'm going to add is taper, just to get a little bit of curve into it, just to make it look a little more natural. You'll see me go back and forth a bunch comparing it with my reference image. The FFD modifier is awesome for most every model I make these days, but it really gives you a lot of control without having to mess up any of your earlier things in the stack. You can always go back and change that taper or add more subdivisions to your turbo smooth, but just really getting a nice natural look on here to make it look as close to that pedal as possible. Now keep in mind, these pedals, there's going to be a couple hundred on each flower. Detail isn't that important, but you know, getting the right shape is going to be important when you get your texture. Alright, now I'm just creating a sphere. It's going to act as my cushion for all of my pedals. Once you get it on here, it's really not that important what the shape of it is, as long as it's something that you can use as a reference yourself. You won't even really see it in the final model. So I'm using that FFD modifier again just to squish it down. Right, then I'm going to go ahead and start grabbing my pedals. I'm moving the center of them, changing them up a little bit right here just to get a little bit of variation. But I'm going to move my pivot point down to the bottom just to make it a little bit easier to move them around. And then I'm just going to start lining them up from a profile view up to the top center. Doesn't have to be exact here. I mean, just keep in mind nature is a I like to call it an organized chaos. It's got a rhythm to it, but it's really, you know, you don't have to be worried about being precise on any of this stuff here. So as we're going along, I'm just continuing to duplicate these, rotate and scale them. In case you're wondering, this is time-lapsed. I don't work this fast. Alright, so next thing you want to do is get that pivot point. You can see me trying a couple different variations of doing that, but basically what you want to do is get your pivot point of all those aligned with your cushion, so that as you rotate them around the axis, you're just creating a uniform look for them. So now I'm just giving them a little bit of offset with each other, so as I do rotate and duplicate them, they don't have as much as a pattern to them. Alright, once again you see me trying a couple different methods here, and as you can see, duplicating them all at the same around that axis isn't working out, so what you end up doing is just taking a few of them from the bottom, rotating those, doing the same up to the top. Having the calculator handy is always good. Then we're just going to add a few more rotated around in the middle here just to cover up that middle part, because we are going to have a top-down view of this that is going to serve as one of our textures, so we don't want any bare spots left in it. A little clipping here and there doesn't matter, it's not really that important for how the texture is going to bake out. Alright, so matching it up again, doesn't have to be perfect. Gonna go ahead and take my first two petals that I made and duplicate them over for my closed version of that petal, or of the pod. And I'm changing the axis back to the middle just to make it a little easier to maneuver them, since I don't have to really have them from that base anymore. Doing really the same process here as before, except realigning the petals to more fit that closed pod. Now, for anyone who's doing this and isn't really experienced in modeling, as you can tell, I'm not, a professional by any means here. I would recommend not having as high of a subdivide as I do. As I get further into this model actually gets up to about 5.5 million polys, which even on a system that's pretty boss right now, it slows you down. And there's really no need. I mean, it's not going to change your texture that much. So doing the same thing here, rotating around, filling it in. And back to the profile view. Now we're just going to go ahead and add that, or take that FFD that we already have on there and start adding some variation to some of those petals to give us a cooler looking profile. Now, even though this is going to end up being a profile shot on these, we are going to have the ability to rotate these around, so go ahead and give it a 360 degree edit there, just so that you can have a little bit of variety as you do move it around. Alright, now what I'm doing here is I'm taking one of those petals, adding an edit poly modifier to it, then attaching the rest of the petals. You want to keep the petal and the pod separate, simply because they're going to have two different textures on it. We are going to add just a base material to it here in a moment to make it a little bit easier when we start baking these. And on the open flower, we are going to add that pod, or that cushion as well, because it's just all one piece. Alright, now you'll see I've already added a couple of stems to these. They're just used by, or created by making a line, hold it down to get a little bit of curve in it. Then you're going to change it to view and viewport. I like to use a rectangle with a small length and width on it. Then just add that turbo smooth modifier to it and you get that nice cool look. From here we're going to go ahead and start creating some of the variety of open and closed stems and petals. So here I'm just rotating them around, matching them up, and I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead and show you the variation that I made. Alright, you can see I rotated around to a couple different angles to get that nice cool look. This is where I'm talking about the top-down view we're going to use, so just rotating it straight up, scaling it up to fit in one of the quads of that original plane we made. When you attach the petals to the stem, make sure you add that match material ID to material so that way you don't condense them. Then you just want to start in the top quad, making just a nice layout with them. I try and keep the stems together in clusters like that because that's typically how they grow. But rotate them around. A nice trick I use to make everything move nicely with each other is just by using links. Link that petal to the top, to the stem. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead here. Go ahead and fill out the bottom as well. Feel free to rotate and scale to get that nice variety. On the bottom is just going to be a huge row of petals. They're actually going to be made for 3 different models using this one texture sheet. Alright, so here you can see the final setup I had ready to bake. I've applied 2 different textures to it, one for the stem, one for the flower. And next thing I'm going to do is grab my initial plane, add a projection modifier to it. I'm going to hit 0 for render to texture to open up that menu. And here you can see it start to crawl. So first thing I do is go to the projection mapping, go ahead and enable that, and I'm going to pick all the objects there that I want to be projected onto it. You can see the list over there on the right. So next thing I'm going to look at my cage, see how it's all bent. Just going to open up the cage, hit reset, and then we're going to push it just to make sure that everything is on the inside in between the plane and the cage. Hit 0 again to open up render to texture. I'm going to pick my render settings and just pick the 3ds Max scan line, load the settings. Going to enable selected object settings. On here I didn't do it, but you want to go ahead and take padding down to 0. We're going to create our own padding later. So now we're going to select on output what type of maps we're going to bake. So a couple different maps. You want to make a diffuse map that's going to get your basic color. Go and find a location and give it a name. And I set all of mine to 2048 by 2048. The final result texture is going to be 1024. It's just when you have that double-sized texture, it makes it a little bit easier when you're editing it in Photoshop later. So you also want an alpha map texture. It's going to be helpful later in UDK. A lighting map and a specular. Creating one or both of those just so you can get some nice highlights later. And then you'll see I create a second diffuse map that's going to be used for a different color map that I make just to help me get a little bit of variety in the color in there. You'll see me click off the enable there because I don't want to bake them both at the same time. I will create a second texture later for that. My current colors on there are simply just a yellow and a green that's set up on a gradient with dark to light. For one of my color maps, you saw me just boost up the self-lighting on it, so that way I just got core colors with no shadowing or shading. And this is just me changing the texture a little bit for my second color map. Turn it back on and disable the others. Alright, over in Photoshop, so you got a couple different maps here. Got a basic diffuse. What I'm doing there is I'm going to select load, taking my alpha map, applying it, and then click alpha mask. You see me change my mind here. What we do is we go back because I want to boost those colors, the brightness a little bit before I start getting into edit it. So I'm going into my curves and just getting it a little bit brighter, because some of my other textures bring a lot more darkness into it, so I want to start with a nice light base. So we go to selection, load, pick my alpha map, and then create a mask. That gets rid of that background. I'm going to go over to my lighting file, copy it over. That's going to give me all my nice highlights. Once I get it there, I'm going to do the same thing, bring my alpha map back in, create a mask on it. Then I'm just going to play around with the different blending modes and opacity on it to basically just get some nice highlights in there without being too dark or too washed out. Then I'm going to bring one of my color maps back in. It's just my core colors, just to bring some of those colors back onto it. I'm going to add the mask back onto it again, and then just play with some of the different blending options. You can turn on and off your layer that you're in to see the effects that it's making. A lot of these get to be really subtle. The more maps you make, the more subtle the changes will be as you change them. Alright, so I'm going to grab the 3 layers that I created. I'm going to merge them down together. So now I want to create that padding for the background. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer, go into blur, create a Gaussian blur. Pretty high settings on the initial one. you get that done, move that layer down underneath so that it's behind your texture. From there, you're going to create a blur behind it, and it's going to be your padding. And all you have to do that is duplicate, 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 duplicate. Occasionally merge those together, and then you'll get a stronger duplication. The reason that we're doing this is because in UDK, or pretty much any 3D rendering program, when we're creating these low poly models, from a distance you're not going to be able to render that whole flower out, so it's going to start assuming on your texture sheet where some of those pixels should be. And you can see it's just creating a nice blur of color similar to the model that you have around it. So instead of just having a white, a black, or invisible texture, you'll actually still have that yellow or green color around approximately where it should be. So duplicate, duplicate, merge down, add another blur to it just to clean it up, and then you'll have your final sheet there. And duplicate again if you want, and then merge those down together. Now, one of the steps you see me skip here is going to be taking that alpha image that I have, instead of the red one, just copying my alpha from the black and creating another image of just the black alpha, because I'll use that again later in UDK. We moved it from 2048 down to 1024. I didn't think the 512 looked high enough, so I took it up to 1024. Now I'm going to create a box here with just a 96 height and a 16 by 16 width, just to simulate the size of a character in UDK, so that when I create this plane, it's about the right size. Just going to add my texture to it, add my opacity field to it as well. You're going to see a little bit of a hue into it, but that's just because I used the red alpha map instead of the black alpha map, so it didn't get rid of my padding. And then just turn it into an edible poly and detach the different faces that are going to be your different models. I'm going to go ahead and scale down the petal to its appropriate size. Alright, so I'm going to grab the sides there and connect it. Get rid of the unneeded faces. Don't forget to turn off preserve UVs there. Now I'm just going to clean up some of the area that I don't need, just so that it's not wasting any render time. I actually end up subdividing it again down the middle, but really what all you're trying to do here is get a nice curve into it so that it isn't flat. Use the bend modifier, use a -40 with a direction of 90, then you'll take the center of it and just move it to the bottom to get that nice curve back like it's being blown by wind. Gonna add a second bend modifier just to give it a little bit of curve, so if you see it from the side you still see it. Ended up with a -40 and an angle of 180. And it doesn't have to be an exact science here. Next thing I'm going to do, so that UDK lights it properly, I'm going to go to an edit normals, pick all my normals, and then just pull them back on that y-axis. Reason that we're doing that, if you think about this being on the ground, all the lighting from the ground, the normals from the ground are going to be pointing straight up, so we need to do it there too. So now I've edited in Vertex Paint, and I want to start off by painting the entire vertex black. Then I want to go back and start painting it at a gradient of red, starting off with about a value of 50, then going to 135, and then maxing it out. Just a slow gradient to the top. Black's wind is not going to affect, red wind will affect. So it's going to have a higher sway at the top of the model than it will at the bottom of it. And then the very bottom you want to make sure is solid black so it doesn't move at all. Now you can see I've created 3 clusters based on my 3 different models there. Small, medium, and large. We'll use those later when we're painting. Then just go to a front view and make sure that you are not going over the axis there, so that when you do paint your ground with these, they're not floating in the air, they're actually in the ground a little bit. From there, go ahead and grab your 3 clusters and export them. I just use an FBX since it's a very simple model. Make sure you have your settings correct. Don't worry about those errors. Alright, over in UDK we're going to go ahead and import our models now. Make sure you go into the setting in static mesh and click combine meshes, otherwise you'll import each one of those planes separately. Going and taking in my textures now, you'll see I have my mask as well. And we're going to go ahead and create our material now. Now this part, it's pretty quick and it's a pretty complex material, so I am going to paste a link in the description of this video with a high resolution shot of this material and how to build it. And I'll also link to the project file so you can actually have a copy of this material if you need it. So what I'm doing here is just creating the custom lighting for it. It's really broken into 3 parts. You have a lighting field, you have your specular field, and then you create your material chain that tells it how for the wind to affect your different vertex paint. In the process of this, you also see me create a couple parameters. Those are really cool when you create a material instance. It allows you to control differently in different levels how your how your actors react. So what we're doing right here is basically creating the specular for it. So instead of having to worry about the specular material, what I'm doing is I'm just creating a reflection that I can change the color and the intensity of through my material instance. We're going to take our lighting model attached to the specular model and then plug that into custom lighting. Now something you see me come back to a little bit later that will save you a little bit of time is if you pull right off of your lighting model and punch that into custom diffuse. That way you won't have the lighting error I have later. This is the material chain for the wind now. In a nutshell, what it's doing is you're taking your wind direction and speed and then affecting the vertex paint to show it how to move, how your material should move off of your model. There's going to be a couple parameters in there that let me change the size of the wind, the waves that actually push your models, the speed of it, and then the resistance it gets. You're seeing me leaving all of the parameters at 0 right now. I come back in a moment and I fix them all up. Once again, the material will be in the description, so if you need to reference it later, go ahead and do that. So that whole top piece we just did was all about the wind, how the wind's going to move. This bottom part is all about the vertex in the model, the Vertex Paint, that is. That last one I plugged into A came from wind power. Alright, we're going to take the vertex color, pull it out of red since that's the color of our vertex. There's our wind. We're going to punch that right into world position offset. Like I say, now make sure you also plug in your custom diffuse, since we only did custom lighting at this point in time. See, I'm filling in the different values right now into my parameters. See, your material started to move right after we did the world position offset as well. Alright, now we're going to create our material constant. You're going to see all the different parameters that we have in here. Change that specular color, all of your different wind speeds. I'm going to copy that material to our clipboard and add it to all of our meshes. And we're going to go ahead and place a couple of those in the map so that we can start seeing how they look. Now here's where you can start seeing those lighting errors I was talking to you about, and me trying to figure out what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and add a wind actor in here so that I can show you how that changing the direction of the wind changes how your materials move. Cool thing about doing it this way is these are all dynamic. So if you want to have a whole Kismet scene or a whole matinee scene where your wind's changing or opening up a door and then all of these things blow, you can do that and they'll react appropriately. Since these are all scalar parameters, you can change them through Kismet as well. And then I figure out you need to plug the texture sample into the lighting diffuse, and you can see it's got the appropriate shading. Alright, now placing each of those by hand would be a little bit annoying. So what you want to do is open up the Foliage Painter. Just tweak your settings so they look right. It's easy to do it like this instead of having a whole big field. Like I said, the great thing is you can change all of these for each level just by creating a new material instance. So all you have to do to use the Foliage Painter is take the meshes you want, drag them in that box, pick what you want it to paint onto, and then click and drag while holding Control. Make sure you save your package or they won't show up when you go in level. And then And there is your final product. See it mixed in there with the grass real nicely. Thanks a lot for watching the video, guys. If you have any questions, just post your comments. Be sure to follow Mr. Stagnation on Facebook, ModDB, NDDB, and our website. And thanks a lot, guys.